Hello citizens and welcome back. In today's video, I want to take a closer look at Star Citizen's release quality and how the game could be tested before release, as well as some generic information about software testing from the point of view of a developer. There are currently about 11,000 bugs active on the issue council, but is there anything CAG could have done to prevent these bugs from finding their way into the release? What tools and methods are available to them? As always, if you like this video, sacrifice a like and a comment to the YouTube algorithm and subscribe for more. And here's a shout out to our amazing patrons and channel members for their support of the channel and everything else I do. So, what can developers do to test their code? If you're a developer, you can probably skip this section because it deals with a lot of the basics. Also, don't you have tests to write? And a related side note for those of you who are new to the channel or don't know me yet, I am an actual real-life software developer, and yes, I should probably be writing tests right now. Anyway, it's a good practice and in some jobs a requirement to test the features you create and the bugs you fix. The simplest and most obvious option is to just run the application and try it. The advantage is that in most cases this doesn't require any additional tools. The disadvantages are that it takes a very long time, it's possible you miss something, and it might not even be possible if the application is in very early stages of development. Let me try to put this in a Star Citizen example. Imagine that you're a developer at CAG working on the refineries, and you're building the functions that calculate the time, cost, and yield for each refinery method. Now, imagine that every time you want to test your work, you have to spin up a local game server, log in, get to refinery, click through the menus. Obviously, you can speed some of this up with the console commands, but it still takes a lot of time. Now, it's still quite useful to do this. Manual testing can reveal visual issues or things that automated testing won't show, and end-to-end testing will sometimes be manual as well. So, as you might have figured out already, a lot of testing is now automated. And there are actually a ton of frameworks that you can use for pretty much every programming language. Some of them are even capable of simulating user actions on the UI. But I don't want to get too specific as they're usually bound to the framework and language you're using. The important part to know is that automated tests are much faster and they can be run automatically as a part of the code merging process. A small explanation on that. As a developer working on an application, there will usually be a centralized repository where the code is stored. As you write code, you create new branches that you then merge into the main branch. This usually requires a merge request or a pull request. And automated tests can be run for each pull request or merge request and can tell you if your code is not introducing new bugs based on the existing set of tests and any tests that you might have added. Now, this process varies across projects and companies, but most follow the dev, test, and production pipeline. But let's not get too deep into that. From what we know, for Star Citizen, CAG used dev, PTU, and live, now with the preview branches and occasional feature branches as well. So generally we recognize three types of tests: unit tests, integration tests, and end-to-end tests. But that might be different depending on the company and project as well. I have been on projects with only end-to-end testing or integration and unit tests, but for the purposes of this video I will explain all of them. And I'm sure I will have a bunch of testers in the comments saying that there are more kinds of tests and I didn't talk about functional or regression testing. And I'm sorry guys, but I'm trying to keep the basics, well, basic. So let's start with unit tests. As the name implies, you're trying to test the smallest possible unit of code. So in most cases, you will end up testing a specific method or a specific module. You are also testing that module separately from the rest of the application. So you actually have to simulate or mock any other modules it depends on, which actually gives you a lot of control over the test scenario, which is very useful especially when you want to test edge cases. So for example, with the refinery code we mentioned earlier, let's assume that there is a method in there that, given the selected ore and the refining method, will calculate the time, cost, and yield. And that method would actually be a great candidate for unit testing to make sure that the correct values are calculated for different inputs. However, sometimes you also want to test how different modules work together. These tests help developers test several modules at once, usually as a part of a single process. And we usually call these integration tests. So let's assume that our refinery calculator is a part of a larger service that manages all refinery jobs in Star Citizen. So an integration test that we can make would be something like submitting a refinery job and seeing if it appears in the database and if the timer matches the expected calculation. And for completion, I should mention that you can mock dependencies as well, which is useful especially when your service is interacting with some external services. And finally, end-to-end testing. The goal of an end-to-end test is to test if the product works in an environment as close to the production environment as possible, so all the modules are present and all required systems are connected. It focuses on the user experience and the user journey through the application. They can be automated, but at this stage, manual testing might provide better results. So with our refinery example, this would mean that a developer or a tester or even an actual player would try to visit the refinery in-game, try out different calculations in the terminal, start a refinery job, and try to retrieve the cargo afterwards. This is essentially the whole point of PTU and the Evocati releases. So now that I explained some basics of testing, I think we can move on to how CAG tests Star Citizen. But first, let me take a brief pause to pay some bills. Most of you watching are not subscribed, so go on and click that button. Also, don't forget to check out the latest episode of the Comm Relay podcast and my community apps, the Hauler and the Armory. Now let's get back to the video. Some of you may believe that CAG don't actually test the game a lot, given the state of the game now and after every release and, well, the number of bugs that are active on the issue council. But from observation, the opposite seems to be true. CAG actually have a lot of QA staff, and I believe that this is where the initial round of known issues comes from, as well as patches getting soul crushed every once in a while during the PTU. So the first step for CAG likely is the developer or the team working on a feature, running a local game server and trying out what they worked on to try and find issues and fix them right away. Once it gets merged, it is handed over to the QA team, and they do more in-depth testing. By in-depth testing, I mean that they try their hardest to break it and send it back to the developer. Now, as I mentioned before, this is very time consuming, especially if you want to test if everything works before you approve a release. So, can CAG automate game testing? Actually, they can. There are a few specific tools such as Game Driver that allow developers to automate game testing. However, since CAG are now using their proprietary Star engine, I think they might have their own tools to do this. And I think showing this to the backers would actually make a pretty good ISC episode. But that kind of brings us to the question of why are elevators always broken? That seems like something that could have an automated test created for it. But on the other hand, elevator issues, while frequent, are pretty inconsistent. Every elevator might be broken, or you might not see a broken elevator for days. Anyway, running the whole game to test things, even if automated, is not very practical. It takes a lot of time and resources to do. Fortunately, Star Citizen is a big game, and it's composed of many services, some of which can be tested independently from the actual game. When you think about it, as a requirement for server meshing, CAG have split a lot of services away from the game instance. Inventory, ATC, large parts of the economy, and other things are now running on their own, which means that they are independently testable without the need to run the game itself. So I believe that CAG have a set of automated integration tests for each of these independent services. They test the basic functions and interactions of different backend services, and this gives them the basis for stopping a PTU build from being released. They likely have a similar system for testing whether a game server will crash right after start, which I think was mentioned in one of the ISC episodes after 320. The combination of all these automated tests can give CAG an overview of how stable a build is and whether it can be released to the PTU. Now, does this prevent bugs? Well, no. The reality is that you can't test for everything. So every once in a while you will introduce a new bug that will make it into production. And the player will do just the right thing under just the right circumstances to trigger that bug. At the same time, a lot of bugs in Star Citizen happen when the game interacts with the backend services, or from performance issues or memory leaks or similar stuff that is very difficult to diagnose in a test. For example, the current inventory and hangar issues we're having right now. I'm sure that QA staff uncover a lot of these before they make it into the release. But I would be very interested in how many issues they catch and how many of those get fixed before a PTU patch is released. So to answer my original question, do CAG test their own game? Yes, they are. Is it enough? For now, I think yes. We also can't forget that CAG rely heavily on backers to find and report bugs as they play. This is actually a pretty solid way to discover rare bugs or bugs that require very specific circumstances. However, as we get closer to 1.0, I think CAG need to step up their quality assurance efforts. And I think we will see some of that this year, since CAG announced that they want to focus on playability in 2025. I think that once server meshing and 4.0 are stable enough, they will start taking a look at the bug backlog currently on the issue council. But why haven't they done that already? Some of the bugs on the issue council have been there for months. Well, simply put, there is a lot to fix, and there were other priorities on features that needed to be added to deliver 4.0, and there was also a lot of work done for Squadron 42. Also, I think the 11,000 open issues on the issue council is a bit of a false number. Some of those are most likely duplicates or no longer valid. And while CAG are actively sorting through those, it's going to take a long time to do so. And even if that significantly reduces the number of open issues, I wouldn't want to be the developer trying to fix all of that. But I definitely hope they will get around to fixing at least the most critical issues. And with that being said, that's all for today. What do you think? Are CAG testing Star Citizen enough? Should they focus purely on fixing critical bugs in 2025? Let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching, fly safe, and I will see you in the verse.